Good evening. Recently, Parliament faced a significant challenge when President Museveni objected to the Appropriation Bill 2024, leading to the reallocation of 750 billion in critical areas such as healthcare, infrastructure, and local development projects. The President cited issues of indiscipline in budgeting, sabotage of national priorities, and corruption among lawmakers as reasons for his rejection. This move has sparked a heated debate on the independence of the legislature, the influence of the executive branch, and the priorities that should guide national expenditure. We unpack these issues and explore the balance of power between the Parliament and the President, the role of corruption and governance in the budgeting process, and the implications of these dynamics for Uganda's development and public welfare. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me introduce my panel this evening. I have Executive Director, Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, Angela Kasule Nabwowe. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm very glad to be here.
And also with us tonight, we have a public policy and governance expert, Bernard Chankara. Thank you so much for joining us, Bernard.
It's a pleasure having me.
Let me begin with you, and from my very extreme left, Bernard. You know, it's very rare for the chief executive to return an appropriation bill. This was returned to the House. I've been wondering, when the Minister of Finance is presenting a budget, when he's reading it before the country, he's doing it on behalf of the President. In other words, he has already accepted a document that has been passed, and now he's reading it. How again can a document presented by the Minister on behalf of the President be rejected?
Thank you, Patrick. It's a question of coherence between government and government institutions, and a coordination with Parliament and, of course, the entire governance structure of the country. So, whereas it is ideal that when the Ministry of Finance reads these bills, it is presumable that the President is well aware. But when you see that scenarios like this come up, it depicts one thing, that there is lack of coherence and coordinations between the ministries and government. Perhaps it also indicates a technical, lack of technical support from the government or the public service or Ministry of Finance to the presidency or to the executive. Because it is ideally expected that through a normal budget cycle, we expect that, one, the government priorities are set clearly, as it is depicted from the manifesto, and then that is broken down through a subsequent budgetary cycle. Now, we expect that Ministry of Finance to be very strategic, yeah, and be able to incorporate the entire, the strategic direction of a country broken down into the subsequent budget that we roll out. And if that is not done in a manner that is very strategic in nature, then the executive, of course, will decline to assent to the bill. Of course, this also comes at the backdrop of issues that have been raised in Parliament. Of course, the executive, as much as in governance structures, there is a clear separation of power. Yeah.
But doesn't that look like a breakdown in itself of the executive branch? Because I presume when the debate is on in Parliament, the Minister of Finance, who is representing the President, is in Parliament. This document actually begins from the Minister of Finance, yeah, brought to Parliament, yeah, and then the Parliament debates about it with the presence of the Minister of Finance, who has about 3 deputies. Yeah. By the time they are going to read this budget before the nation, then the Minister has looked through, he has accepted. In fact, it's not the Minister accepting, because this is the role of the President. They have accepted the document. How again do you go back and say, no, actually this is not it?
You see, the action of the President is within the Constitution. Yeah? The President can assent or can decline to assent on the bill that is passed by Parliament. It's a constitutional mandate. However, in this particular scenario, we there is, of course, a general public outcry and the way the public view Parliament as it is. And of course, this has been going on for quite some time. It has actually been long overdue that the executive, in its powers, attempts to tempt Parliament. Of course, it's tricky because it's a clash of separation of power. But the executive in this particular scenario, I think the president is using it as a tool to communicate to Parliament and say, look, I'm aware of what is happening, and so if you tempt or you've been sabotaging the budgetary process, I'm aware, and that can be checked. So I think the president is using this particularly as a tool to check. You see, Patrick, our major problem in this country is attention to details. This Parliament, and of course even the executive or even the Ministry of Finance, have been passing budget as a ritual, as a routine, yeah, and that is why there has been malpractices within the budgetary cycle, because our members of Parliament have not been equipped, rather, with the necessary skills to pay attention to the details of the budgetary process, and that is why this corruption has come.
So I'm still with you, Bernard. You know, what intrigues me is when I remember what the roles of a member of Parliament are: to appropriate, to legislate, and the oversight role. So if they do appropriation, which is within their mandate, yeah, and then, of course, as you're saying, the president has the powers to not to assign a bill, but isn't that really hitting at the core function of Parliament, which is appropriation?
Exactly. You see, we're dealing with this separation of power, which it is true, it is important in the multi-party dispensation that separation of power must be observed. However, where the legislature is not up to its game, okay? I raised the concern earlier that our members of Parliament have lacked the ability to pay attention to the detail. There are several budget items that we pass with the word others, and there are others that are sneaked in. So the attention to detail is where the problem has been. And so the Parliament in its own power, or its own right, has the obligations to appropriate. But under the circumstances where the executive thinks that, which has been a problem, and I think the president it has been long overdue, this should have been checked much earlier, yeah, where the Parliament does not execute its mandate in a manner that reflects the interests of Ugandans, then there are concerns. We've seen the cases of corruptions come in. In fact, I was sharing with a colleague earlier in the day, and he told me that I think Parliament is a crime scene. Yeah. So where the Parliament is not paying attention to the details, then the executive,
now that you're talking about paying attention to the detail, let me come to Angela, because you know, sometimes the ladies pay more attention to detail. But I don't know whether you've been able to pay attention to the budget of 2024-2025. And I'm asking you this because I just want to know the priority areas and how the money has been disbursed. I remember it was at 58 trillion. Then all of a sudden, the corrigenda and push it to 72 trillion. And I'm like, how does it just all of a sudden move from 58 to 7, such a huge chunk? But is this the kind of budget that is going to work for Ugandans?
Thank you, Patrick. Maybe just to start off from where he stopped, yes. You said attention to detail. Yes. What is happening in Parliament and also within government is unprecedented. Because actually what we had before is that, we had the budget being presented, but it was not the approved budget. But from the time we enacted the Public Finance and Management Act, so what is presented is like, finalized. And there should be some coordination like my colleague has submitted. But when you look at the process around that, you'll see that when you read the letter, you're talking about detail. Yes. When you read the letter from the president to Parliament, and you see the words he's using, the statements he's using, he's like, he has a lot of information about Parliament, around corruption and how they have messed up the budget. And he's using the corruption to hold them at ransom. Let me use that word. Like, you know, I have something on you. You should do it as I want. So then you forget about the separation of power, and then you see the executive taking on the role of appropriation, which is supposed to be done by Parliament.
Yes.
And the danger with that, because actually when this first happened, we celebrated as Ugandans, because like you're saying, it moved from 58 to 72. But that was, you know, in hours when that happened, yeah. And due processes were not followed. So that the whole process this time around, you know, we've been playing like gymnastics, and so the president is using the information, and of course being president, he has intelligence on most of these members of parliament, and so he has information on what they have been doing. There is the legal corruption and there is the illegal you know, the legalized corruption in parliament. And there is the illegal. Okay. We'll go into that, Patrick. Okay. We'll go into that. So he has a lot of information about them. And even when he returns it, and for me where I get the problem is that the president was acting in his powers from the constitution to return this budget. But as parliament, you do not just rubber stamp what he's given you, because your parliament, you have that role of, you could actually hold your stand and say, we are actually not changing it, and there is that back and forth. But because the members of parliament and what has been happening in parliament has been so gross, abuse of public resources, these MPs cannot actually speak up and say, no, this is parliament, we are supposed to do this, and stand up to the president, because everyone there in parliament knows that if I shout, if I make noise, maybe I'm on that list. You know, the list that I've been moving around.
The data file.
The data file. So someone thinks I'm on that file. So I cannot just stand up. So that is why they have to rubber. And I find it odd that actually parliamentarians are crying out, saying that their power has been taken over by the executive. And they think that us, the public, the citizens, we should be with them. But are they still members of parliament? Are they working in our interest?
How does the budget increase from 58 to 72, an addition of 14 trillion, and you only have hours to debate about that? That also doesn't sound right.
It doesn't sound right, and actually we are having challenges even with what was presented within the corrigenda, the 72, because when you look at some of the things in that corrigenda, you see there is money to be able to pay cultural leaders, 37 billion. And you're like, why do we need even have to pay cultural leaders 37 billion in the economy we have where we are struggling? And with that 72 trillion, how much is URA able to collect? But when you look at those figures, for instance, we are going to borrow 40 trillion to finance that budget. And the question you ask is that, I mean, what is the need, yes, like for the people? Currently, we are in a state, when you look at that budget, that the money that is going to social protection, the money that is going to education, the money that is going to health, and these are things that people should be able to feel. When you combine all that money, it is less than what is going into debt repayment. And for us as citizens, we are like, okay, what is going to happen? Because already we are being too ambitious with the budget. You're having a budget of 72 trillion, but what are you able to collect domestically?
Okay, Bernard, I have never understood this whole idea of us appearing to have a huge budget, 72 trillion. But as Angela is telling us, you know, we're going to borrow 40 trillion. And by the way, the debt repayment or service, yeah, is also such a huge, actually the biggest chunk of that budget is debt servicing. Yeah. And I'm wondering, why don't we even forget about the whole budget and look at what we have in our kitty that is there for use, instead of just using a huge figure that is actually not even there? Because when you talk about 72 trillion, the biggest chunk is actually debt servicing.
Patrick, maybe let me first go back to the issue that you raised earlier, that what was the need to increase it from 58
to 72
trillion? I think that speaks to the question of the strategic way of how government is operating. Because if you if you are a government that is not strategic, then you'll always bring this panic, more of a panic decisions. And so that tells you that there is an element of incompetencies within the institutions of governance. Because you cannot increase a budget within a short period of time. And that, okay, how long have you been planning for this? How have you strategically looked at it? What is the implication? Where are you taking this country? And I think that is not right. Now, going back to the debt question, I think that it is a little bit of excitement. Of course, we have experienced some relative growth in the previous financial year. And of course, now government is trying to react, looking at the regional countries. When you look at, for example, what Kenya has done in terms of its infrastructure development, logistics, especially the railway, and when you look at what our neighbor Tanzania is doing, and of course you realize that Uganda is a little bit behind. And so it's a little bit reactionary for me. We don't have the capacity to pay our debt effectively, and very soon we will go into what we call the debt distress. We've seen the crisis that Kenya is currently experiencing as a result of excessive investment, that debt ceiling that has grown exorbitantly high, and so they are not able to adequately raise the resources to sustain the economy. And that is why we see the young people trying to get into the streets and try to call government into order. And so even us, in our case, if we are not careful, we will create a scenario where the citizens will come and ask government by themselves and try to hold government accountable. Well, of course, the political dynamics in Uganda is relatively different from that of Kenya, but at any one point, the citizens will hold government accountable if we are not careful with the way we handle our budget and the way we raise the revenue in this country.
Angela, can't we just deduce that the parliament as we have it today actually does not do its role of appropriation, that even the previous budgets, what comes as proposals from the Ministry of Finance, the budget framework paper, they just, you know, send it the way it is? Because if the executive can override them every time they want, then we can conclude that actually they are not doing their role.
They are not just not doing their role, but I think we have to ask questions whether they are still representatives of the people. Because even in that core agenda, you see that there's 120 billion for the Parliament Commission. And you're like, how did we get to that level? So what is happening in Parliament is that it is not about the people anymore. It's people, you know, it's about their interests. How much can we get from Parliament? And the processes that happen around their own appropriation, I think, is what we're talking about, the legalized corruption, like the way they are doing the budget to suit their needs. And because they are using the processes in Parliament, what is happening is that people are not going to come up and question, because, you know, this is something that has gone through the budget committee. It has been agreed on by the House. And for us, we are saying, when you do that appropriation, is it right? Is it going to impact the lives of the citizens? I think those are questions that parliamentarians are not asking, and it is very easy for any citizen to say that these people are not our representatives, and what they are doing is for their own stomachs, and how they can survive probably when they do not get up, when they are not.
But look, what Parliament initially wanted was money for buying ambulances, money for building bridges, I think also money for local development projects. And now versus the needs of the president. And I'm thinking, it looks like they had a good argument for them to stand their ground and be able to defend where they thought money should be, because that resonates with the electorate even, and the needs of a country.
I think what has happened is that our MPs have been caught stealing meat from the saucepan, and the meat is in their mouth, and that is why they are hanging on to the ambulances, because they want something that will resonate, with the public, something that will solicit, sympathy, and oh, we wanted this money for ambulances. How do we take away money for ambulances? The same way the government departments use supplementary budgets. They bring something, that you say,
I think there's a vote, something called others.
Yes.
So for you who are paying attention to detail, others is what? What is that animal called others?
Yeah, and that is where they hide things, because even initially, that's where, you find money about Lobo. But Patrick, if we could go back into what is in the budget, the 750 billion.
Yes.
What is in there? So that has been approved, because even in the 750 billion, there is 1 billion that has been approved for Gulu Regional Referral Hospital for wages, because we have been having a challenge where, you put up facilities and you do not have the human resources. There is that money in the 750 that the president has brought back. But I think if they are doing appropriation, there are other things that they could have caught their eye in that they shouldn't have just rubber stamped. I'll give you an example. In that 750 that has been passed, there is money that is 10 billion for Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, that they are going to outsource for budget research, 10 billion. And you're like, but you have technical officers within the Ministry of Finance who can do that work. They're already on the wage bill. You have 4 billion shillings for sensitization and workshops for local governments, but you also have another 4 billion for PR, for public relations, for local governments around PDM. It's like, PDM, this is sensitization and workshops, then another 4 billion, it is for public relations, same item. And like, do we really need to do this? But also, there is other money that has been put on consultancies. And you're like, why do we need consultants for the local government? Because you have technical officers from Ministry of Local Government, but also at the local government level, you have technical officers that are part of already the big wage bill. How do we then justify these costs? And why for us that is important? For instance, when you look at the 10 billion that Ministry of Finance is taking for outsourcing research, budget research, 10 billion is what Ministry of Gender needs to be able to, for instance, to correct errors of national IDs or national IDs of older persons who are not getting social protection benefits. But you're putting it to, you're outsourcing, you want researchers. But you have this whole team at Ministry of Finance. These are technical people. Why can't they be able to do this work? Especially now that we are talking, tighten your belts. What does tighten your belt mean? Do you just throw away money like that when you have, unfunded priorities? For instance, when you look at our education sector, Patrick, when you look at UPE and the way it is being implemented, we have schools, the infrastructure is so bad. In what Ministry of Education had presented, they wanted to renovate at least 200 schools implementing UPE. And 40% of those schools are in a dilapidated state. When the rains start, children are not going to be studying in those classrooms because it's a matter of life and death. They have to stay at home. So when you look at the wastage and where the money is going, like, how do you justify, you have 4 billion for PR, for what?
Bernard Jankara, explain to me, if you could, why, because where money is supposed to go is where it would be good for the Ugandans to benefit from their money. But when you take it away and put it in an area that's not going to benefit the people, as if you don't get it.
That is a mistake, really, because Parliament, in its own wisdom, did say that I think there's some good money that is supposed to go into health, and I agree with them. The gaps that we experience, especially in handling emergency in this country, is enormous, and many people die along the roads. And so when Parliament suggested that we should have the ambulances purchased and all these other, I think it is in the good interest, and that speaks to the interest of the local people, which is also a good public policy practice. However, the questions of procurement process, you see, what the president has been raising is that a sabotage in the process. So you might realize that you remember the cases of helmets the helmet scandal that happened in this country some time back. So the question of procurement can become a problem, whereas the general interest can be good for the public. The sabotage within the system doesn't allow that. Sooner or later you realize that yes, we have passed a budget for the purchase, for the procurement of ambulances, but they will never be bought. Or if, in any case, if we buy them, they will never reach to the people. And so it is within the interest of Parliament, one, to show us the political will that they're actually acting in the interest of citizens. We initially, if you look at the parliamentary payroll, for example, the cost of handling one individual MP within a month is exorbitant. And so if the president has come up and said, I think let's pick this money and take it back, let the parliamentarians show us the political will. Can they tomorrow come from the recess and say, okay, since the president has, for us as representatives of the people, we are going to pick 10% of our emoluments and say that, okay, let's have this ambulance bought. Can we do that?
I don't know. That looks like a tall order, but let's go back to the other specific. And you talked about the borrowing, almost 40% going to be borrowed. Where are they going to borrow from? Because if they're going to borrow internally, then that also has its own implication on the economy and other people who are interested in doing business, because I can imagine banks will be willing and ready to borrow money to the government than me and you and I. And that will crowd us out, which is not good, because unless people are working, then also you have very few places where you can mobilize local revenue.
Yeah, so the borrowing is both domestic and the grants that we get, the concession. So it's both. Mm-hmm. And of course, the private sector has also expressed concerns around that and how they are going to be competing with government. Of course, there have been assurances like from the PS, stroke Secretary to the Treasury, that people really shouldn't worry, but we know that that is really a big challenge. But Patrick, what you need to understand is that we need to even understand why are we even borrowing when we can raise money here internally, and the things that we have been talking about, and why what we have, what is it actually doing. I still want to go back to the 750 billion, because when you look at that figure, Patrick, and for me I have really a problem why we should even be doing this massive borrowing. We are putting 300 billion towards ROCO construction. A private company. A private company. And for me that is really a problem, because you have to bring in this factor of private profit and public loss. When a private actor is making money, it's none of our business. And then when they are making losses, then we have to bail them out. But why that is very key is that what are we getting in terms of profits from these companies where the government is saying is putting money? And for me, why ROCO is also more important is that the president is on public record saying that, you know, everything has been mismanaged. I'm handing over the construction to the UPDF, construction brigade. UPDF is doing construction of schools, hospitals, and things like that. Why are you then putting money into ROCO? Because you're saying everything has been mismanaged, and you have your UPDF that you trust, that is to do this work. Then why are we still giving money to ROCO? The other question is, and why we are disturbed as citizens. We have shares in Speak Resort Munyonyo, 25% government shares. But it is on record that, you know, they were coming up and telling us that, you know, there are no audited reports for 4 years. And what have we got from having shares in Speak Resort Munyonyo that will justify government buying more shares in private companies than ROCO? But also, you said UPDF can do the construction. Why are we giving money a private actor? And for me, that is where the problem, because we are going to continue borrowing. Because the other thing also about borrowing is that out of the 750 billion, 25 billion is is needed, you know, the fees that you pay, commitment fees, because of the challenges that we have around procurement. So you get a loan, but then you have to pay commitment fees because you have not sorted out, for instance, you know, this is for infrastructure projects. You've not sorted out right of way. Patrick still has, you know, their home there. You've not yet, you've not yet, and then you are acquiring a loan, and then you have 25 billion in that 750. That is going towards commitment fees. So that is why we are going to continue borrowing, and we have to question that borrowing.
Also, which reminds me, there have been cases where you see a road construction is going on borrowed money, but all of a sudden they will stop. Why? Because they don't have a right of way. And I'm wondering, why do you even have to get a contract on the site before you have actually finalized with the PAPs, the project affected persons, and compensated them, and they're out of the way? Actually, in some cases, the designs have had to change because the PAPs, their interests have not been taken care of.
Exactly. You see, what happens in this country is that we have cartels that understand the government interest. So they go quick enough, very fast behind the scene, and perhaps buy this land and buy all these other, where the strategic government investment is going to pass. And that creates a bottleneck. Whereas government will know that, okay, I want to do this, for example, the Ginger Express Highway that is being talked of. So you'll find that cartels have gone behind the scene and have purchased land where where that investment is going to pass. And in so doing that, they sabotage the process. Well, last week in one of the forums that I speak, I said there is no government that can strive by borrowing or taxing its way. It is really in government interest that let's tempt our borrowing, and then we try to work within our means. But you see, government at some time, especially in infrastructural development, they try to be very strategic. For example, if they're planning to decongest Kampala, they want to do a certain project A and B. But like I said, it is usually the cartels that go behind and sabotage the process and make it a little bit difficult for government to execute investment. If you recall, there were cases that government wanted to invest significantly. Even in this northern bypass had issues. Yeah. So for me, I think government is too quick to borrow. I think it's important that government measure why they're borrowing and for the purpose, and then have even the negotiations done prior before.
I've had many people, especially in the government, say, look, we shouldn't get worried about the borrowing. Look at what is happening in the region. That others are way above, you know, that they are in 60% or 70 or whatever it is. There's that element that gives them comfort. Are they right?
Patrick, it is capacity to repay. When you want to borrow, you must look at your capacity to repay. We are a country that we collect, I think, 14% of our GDP, yeah? And our tax base is relatively very narrow. If we have progressed, then probably. So our tax base is very narrow.
Our tax ratio GDP
it's actually very low. It's 14%, I think 14 or 15, if I can. So our capacity to repay is challenged, yeah, because we have a very low tax base. That aside, even the behavior of government, we have cases of corruption. The money that we borrow. Recently, in the Uganda Investment Authority, the money that they borrowed to do a certain kind of investment, it was actually distributed as a service award. I watched on news.
Yes, there's that issue between the minister and the executive director.
Yes, I watched on news and I said they distributed that money. So borrowing is not sustainable. We must measure our capacity to repay. Once the correct issues like corruption is exorbitantly high the way it is now, then even the money that we are borrowing are not being channeled to the
But Angela, they would argue that we pay borrowed money every year. Many would argue that borrowing is not bad. In fact, other countries are even borrowing more heavily than Uganda. In your view, why is it bad for Uganda to borrow when the rest of the world is actually borrowing even more than Uganda is attempting to do?
The best way to answer that is to look at the impact of the payment of the debt. especially on social sectors, and how much you're paying in debt repayment vis-a-vis the social sectors. And the challenge with that is that the casualty, so when you need money to pay back because you know you have to fulfill your obligations, it is very unlikely that they are going to touch the money of Parliament Commission. They are not going to touch the money of State House. They are not going to touch money of security. So the money that they are going to touch is health, it is education, it is social protection. And for me, that is the challenge, that you're shortchanging rights. You're shortchanging economic, social, and cultural rights because, you know, people, Patrick, I don't know how many WhatsApp groups you are on, but every day people are fundraising on those WhatsApp groups for their loved ones or friends, in-laws, to be able to go for medical treatment abroad. And why is that happening? It's because we do not have the facilities here, and such methods are not even sustainable. But why? But in Parliament, for instance, if an MP gets sick, they will get the medical care they need. And that doesn't matter whether they are NRM or opposition. They will all benefit from that. But it is you, Patrick, when you get sick and you have this ailment, either you auction your properties and then you get NTV people to fundraise for you to be able to go to India. For them, they have the option of medical treatment abroad via my money that I pay in taxes. So when we borrow and the money that we are paying back, we have done the analysis, and you see the budget for education, the budget for healthcare, the budget for social protection that includes the money that we give older persons. Right now, actually, that budget is now stagnant. There are people who are even making 8 years. We're already arguing that the 8 years is too high, that you should reduce it, and there is no money for that. There is a shortfall. And so it is those sectors that are going to suffer. It is money for UPE capitation grants, the money that the schools use for running of schools implementing universal primary education. This money to expand access to secondary education, that is going to, those are going to be the casualties. But they are not going to touch the budget of the Speaker, no.
Oh, Angela Kasule and Bernard Chankara, we're going to take a break on the spot. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Kamara, and my guests this evening have Angela Kasule Nabwowe, Executive Director, Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, and Bernard Chankara, Public Policy and Governance Expert. We're discussing Parliament, the President, and Uganda's budgetary priorities. You know, sometimes I wonder, where should the money be put so that money can make more money for Uganda? When you look at what is, you know, where we are spending more money, it is just consumption than development. Can we turn it around and we put more money into development where we invest, and then where we invested the money, then it can create more funds, more resources?
Yeah, we're a population of, I think, now 46 million people. Yeah, and when you look at the structure of our population, you find that majority are actually young people. Yeah, and there is no single country in the world that has developed or has grown without investing in its human resource. Our biggest problem in this country is that we have human resource that are somewhat technical, okay? We have very many that continues to drop out of schools. We have limited investment in the technical institutions that can skill our young people that are majority of the population. And so if we're really serious about economic growth and development, let's take the money and invest it to the people. Government has been appropriating resources. For example, the youth poverty elevation programs like the MIOGA, the PDM, and the youth livelihood and the rest. Yeah, but that investment has not made significant contribution. Why? Because if you go within such investment, then you realize that actually the human resource, the capacity of these people that we are giving money, resources to transform that resources, or to have that entrepreneurial skills that can transform that resources into
But Bernard, there has been an increase, for example, in coffee production. Yeah. We are reaching almost 8 million bags, and probably we have the biggest, we take the biggest chunk of the coffee revenue on the continent.
Yeah.
And so yes, that's a plus.
I was just about to come into that. We are, so one element is investing in the capacity and the human resource of this country. The other element is value addition. Of course, the president has been spot on when he has been singing about
value addition.
Value addition. We are an agricultural country, but I come from Amoro, and when you go to Amoro during mango seasons, you will be amazed what quantity of mangoes that actually drop on the ground and never get into the market or get into the value chain that can actually make significant investment.
But Amuru has gone quite extensively in agriculture, mechanized. They see, I think even the ethanol and all the things they're making in Amuru.
Amuru is really terrible. I think you're confusing Amuru and Noya.
Oh, Noya, yes. Noya.
But I think Noya has made significant progress as compared to Amuru. Where I come from, is really terrible. So the point I'm trying to say is that we can do value addition and get people into serious investment, improve their capacity, entrepreneurial skills, so that they're able to reproduce these resources that we are trying to take to them. Short of that, we will continue to struggle because we will not have the transformation that we aspire because they don't have the skills.
So one of the problems, Angela, we have, you talked about it and even Bernard earlier, is the issue of corruption. And we seem to see efforts ongoing in combating that vice. Do you think this is real or somebody is playing for the gallery?
Patrick, the corruption we are having now, it is at another level. What is happening, for instance, in Parliament is what you would term as legalized corruption. And how is that legal? Is that you do the processes in Parliament, put something in the budget or meeting seat, and then you say, okay, this is what we are giving ourselves. And when you look at the economy and the amount of money that is being wasted in Parliament, I'll use the word wasted because it is wastage, that is, people are drawing this money, first of all, legally, because they will do all the paperwork, there will be meetings, there will be minutes, but also it will be in the budget. So that is why I'm using the word legalized corruption. And we have to ask ourselves that if something is legal, yes, for instance, you have increased your per diems, the money you're using to travel, holiday and things like that, what you're giving yourselves allowances and what you're even appropriating for your personal homes. You've put it and, it has been signed off, it is cleared, so you've legalized it. And we are saying, yes, you're drawing it, it is legal, but
is it right?
I mean, is it reasonable law? That is the question that we have to ask. Looking at the economy and what we are struggling with, is it reasonable law that you do that you're giving yourselves all this amount of money? Because the other thing also we have to think about is that Parliament is supposed to make laws. And we have laws in this country, and people have talked about it, where one person, Patrick, is going to draw emoluments from the consolidated fund for different positions that he has held from the consolidated fund. And then you have other positions in retirement that you're getting, and then you're fully facilitated, still drawing money from the consolidated fund. And you're like, is this the economy where such things should be happening? Why don't we look into changing those laws? Because we've even tampered with the Constitution. Why can't we change those laws in light of what is happening? Because we are being told all the time there is no money, but we are seeing the money being wasted. How are you going to convince people that the money is not there? And then you see all these stories around corruption and how much money is being lost. How are you going to tell a primary school teacher that I do not have money to renovate this classroom, you're going to use under a tree, and then they see all this on NTV where you're reporting about these corruption scandals? But also even the money that has just been appropriated by Parliament, you have 5 billion for printing a corruption survey. Why do we need to print a corruption survey for 5 billion in any case?
You think it's everywhere they don't need to make a survey?
Yes, but, you just have to arrest. You just have to arrest those people and prosecute them.
But Bernard, you know, the issue of corruption, the fight seems to be on, but Angela thinks no.
No, Patrick, corruption, what the president is doing is dealing with this. It's like he's giving first aid. The corruption level in this country is systematic. Systemic and systematic in nature. Yeah, and if we're serious about fighting corruption in this country, let's go back to the institutions. You cannot fight corruption, which is to our level, by dealing with mere symptoms and first aid kind of reactionary approach. Let's deal with the institutions. For example, the IGG. I have not had a significant where the IG has come in and strengthened this position and its role. Okay, we have these institutions, that the police, we have the judiciary. Let's strengthen these institutions, and then we will know that we are actually serious about fighting corruption. Talk about transparency. One element of fighting corruption is transparency. Okay, when government come in and then say, when the executive comes in and say, we are giving 300 billion to Rocco, and there is no clear justification, and there's no clear justification on that, and why that money is being allocated to Rocco, for example, and Parliament has not sat to approve whether government is actually buying shares on that particular element, then we then start questioning the level of transparency of government. And one strong element that we can be serious, that shows that we're actually serious about fighting corruption, is government being as transparent as possible. The other things that are really silent and are really very important is the protection of the whistleblowers, for example, yeah, and the incentives that comes with it. Otherwise, the issues at Parliament would have been addressed.
But yeah. I'm wondering, we have all these institutions which are geared at, you know, looking through the books of accounts. You have the Auditor General, of course, money is going to be released, and the Auditor General will follow, and in most cases, he will definitely make a report that will come to Parliament, and the committees that are accountability committees are in the hands of the opposition politicians. Don't we have, isn't that mechanism enough to check whether there has been a return on investment and effective utilization of public resources, or you doubt the capacity of the Auditor General?
It is not doubting the capacity of the Auditor General, but we know that we have also been told that out of the 10 trillion that is stolen, only 1 trillion has been recovered. Like, you know, what so far is recovered is, you know, 1 trillion out of 10 trillion. I think there are so many factors at play. Yes, we have the institutions, but we feel that these institutions, first of all, their investigative powers, I think, is limited, but also the capacity to bite. You know, you'll talk about something, but being here in this country and being Ugandans, we have not really seen where people who have stolen public money have really been made to pay. We have had some resignations, and maybe there might be hope in the future. We're told that the people in, for instance, Uganda Investment Authority, you know, it came out in the media and all that, they were very unlucky. They were the few who were unlucky, and, you know, they agreed to return the money. But I think that is just a fraction of what is taken. We need to see where people's properties are auctioned. That is what we want to see. You know, if someone has stolen and there are properties that are identified, can we auction them and have that money returned? But also the issue around serving in public service, you know. We've not really seen, like, you know, many people, you know, that have been implicated. You know, people serve their term in Rosilla, but you've not really seen it, as in we've not really felt it that there is really goodwill. But also the challenges, for instance, that, sorry, we have to refer so much back to Parliament, because Parliament has been really, what is happening there is so bad, to the level that we have lost trust in that institution, and we even feel that they do not even have more authority to be speaking on even these issues, message, because there has to be some cleansing that has to happen in that house.
You know, now we have a house who's the leader, the speaker, is facing allegations of corruption, and then from the United Kingdom and the United States, and they are blocking her from going there or even transacting business. I mean, these are great democracies. These are countries also that have an impact. That, for example, the U.S. is funding almost 80% in the fight against HIV and AIDS, and yet you have the speaker of your nation, and they're telling you you're persona non grata there. You're not even needed to. They can't allow you to do business there or even go there. So we are really pushed in the corner, aren't we?
It's not enough.
Most definitely, but if I can just quickly just recap. I had the Secretary of State for the U.S. the other day, but he did actually mention that they are pushing against human rights, and in that statement, the Secretary of State did say that they're pushing against human rights, and of course that was linked to the anti-gay bill that the Parliament passed. And I think that to a larger extent a little bit relieved the concerns of corruption on Anita Mong, and that created a clear disparity that the sanction actually was more linked to
on human rights,
to human rights concerns, and not corruption directly as per se. But that does not, of course, let the Speaker of Parliament off the hook, yeah, because as citizens of this country, we have seen, and we have seen documents that have been circulated on social media. We will be cornered. We will be pushed to the limit on corruption. And I think it is in the interest of this country that we must learn to collaborate. There are institutional, international agencies, including the US and of course others, that we can actually leverage and use those international arrangements to see that we fight corruption. I think pushing government officials to be accountable on questions of human rights, on questions on corruption, it's important. And
so in this fight, just about 2 weeks ago, a member of parliament was caught on camera somewhere in Luengo saying that if you steal, so long as you can come and share with the people, that's okay. I think those are the most unfortunate words that have come out from the honorable member of parliament before a public event.
And those are very dangerous statements, because you have a lot of young people who are struggling to get jobs. You have families that are borrowing to pay school fees because the public education system is, the funding for the public education system is really very low compared to our peers. What we are putting into education is only 80% of our budget. Our peers, when you look at Kenya, where they are even not satisfied, if you look at Rwanda and all that, they are putting, even poor countries like Sierra Leone, they are putting at least 18%, more than 18% of their budget into education. So if people have to borrow to pay even for basic education, and we also have reports even from international agencies like UNESCO telling us that 30% of Ugandans have to borrow to pay school fees, which is not sustainable. So you're telling parents who are borrowing to pay school fees because the public education system is failing and the private sector is exploiting that, and you're telling them it is okay to steal, and these are the people who are suffering. So what kind of message are they taking in as young people who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow? Are you training thieves? I think for me, I found those messages very disturbing, especially as a parent, that what message, so you're actually telling people, strive so hard to make it to parliament and you can be able to, to acquire these resources, and it doesn't matter how you acquire them. So what does it say about our country, and what are you telling these young people to practice? Because you're telling them actually that stealing is okay, and we are saying it is very wrong. They should be able to retract those statements and apologize actually to the nation, because it is a very bad precedent. And the people you're telling that it is okay to steal and I bring to you, the tokenism that you're giving, you're going to pay someone school fees, it is not sustainable. We need to be able to put money in public systems. I mean, how many people are you going to pay school fees for as an MP? This is something that we should be advocating, you know. If it is healthcare, can we put money in public systems? If it is education, can we put money in public education? If someone wants to choose private, they can choose, but they shouldn't be forced.
Don't we also have to blame Ugandans and for lack of, you know, competence or competent civic engagement? That because if we had a vibrant citizenry that can ask questions like Angela are doing or Bernard are doing, probably wouldn't be taken for granted. People would say why at the moment. But because we don't have you know, a vibrant civic engagement. But
that still goes back to education. The kind of education that people are getting, the ones who are getting some level of education. When you look at the World Bank Economic Update for Uganda for December 2023, they will tell you that a child born in Uganda now, productivity will be at 38%. Why? Because you have children who are finishing primary 7, they cannot even speak in public. They cannot express themselves. But then, when we are reading the budget, you know how the Minister of Finance is elaborating for you the priority sectors. They're talking about education, they're talking about healthcare, but children cannot read. So are those going to be able to ask questions? No. That means that we have to get serious about our capital investment in human capital development. When you look at the report of the Budget Committee of Parliament, one of the recommendations they make is that they need to be able to balance human capital development and infrastructure development, because, you know, if you don't do that, you're widening the inequality. So you're going to have people in villages and you can't tell them anything because they do not have the capacity to question.
So, but how we look at that? Because we're not all that very different from the Kenyan population, but they seem, whether they're in rural or in urban areas, to be able to ask the right questions, to know their responsibilities and know their rights, as opposed to us. And for that matter, the leaders have to move cautiously.
For democracy to strive, Patrick, is that government must have the political will, first to invest in its people, give them the information that they need. Yeah, we have a population that don't pay attention to details. Like I said earlier, the budget was passed recently, but if you go outside in the streets and ask, okay, how much is the budget and how much is the allocation? Ugandans don't know these things. They think it is just utopia thinking, and they don't know completely. And of course, that can only be achieved if government is interested in letting the citizens know that this is what is happening. Yeah, and that now leads us to what is the level of investment into civic awareness and civic education in our communities. Yeah, and that is relatively low, and that is why our population actually they don't pay much attention to what our government is running and what is happening within the government, within government systems. Even the issues that we are struggling with now in Parliament, the citizens, a few of them know that this is that Parliament has turned into a crime scene. Yeah. And they're not interested because they think that is way far away from us, not knowing that they hold the power and they can hold leaders accountable to their actions and to the behaviors. So for me, I think that zeroes down to the interest. What is the political will of government? Patrick, dictatorial regimes across the world strive on the public ignorance. And the moment the public is not aware, then dictatorial government continues to what? To survive. They leverage the ignorance of the people. And so for me, I think it is in the interest of this government, if we must grow our democracy, let's take the information to the people. Because the moment the people are not aware of what is happening, how transactions are being done in government, the citizens will never take. In Kenya, Kenya have an historical background to which how citizens behave. And Kenya's democracy has been growing over time. And the level at which the citizens pay attention to how government is running is amazing, which is quite different from this country. Yeah. The young people of Kenya, the other day, we saw them on the streets. You find a young person of 18, 19, they're asking questions. Why are we increasing the issues? They're articulating these issues. They are aware. They are interested. In this country, our young people other than not having the information, they're not really much interested into how the affairs of this country is being run. And if the few that are enlightened enough to take interest, they are on social media and they'll remain there, other than asking the critical question. Of course, I'm not disregarding the impact of social media in terms of civic awareness, but there are certain levels that you can engage as citizenry. But for me, I think government, if we must grow our democracy, if we are interested that this is a multi-party dispensation and we must grow our democracy, let's give the information to the people. As government, or those that are in government, let's be very transparent in the way we run. Otherwise, all these corruption issues, the citizens will be able to raise them. And as government, we provide the institutions to protect them as whistleblowers. These issues will come. We have cows that are stealing, cows and RDCs that are stealing huge chunk of district budget. Yeah. But without citizens' awareness,
but Angela,
informations cannot
even
come.
in Kampala, the young people have their mobile phones, their smartphones, they also have their MBs, but the conversation is kind of different. In fact, the other day, I remember during the 3rd June Mother's Day, there's a young girl who could have said unfortunate words, and how she traveled from wherever she was to come to, and that became the national talk.
From Chamliwa.
Yeah, from Chamliwa. And that's the talk. I mean, that's us. That's us, and even the T-shirts are out and all kind of stuff, and you know, about this young lady who perhaps had a mental challenge, but that becomes our talk. So we are talking differently. We are not engaging. Why?
Yeah, Patrick, the other way, I've had discussions with peers, and one of the things we have, noted and maybe thought about was like, is this like some kind of coping mechanism for people?
I think so.
Because people have lost hope. They don't see, as in people are on their own. So when they see something like that, to take away your stress, to forget about all your problems, I think people are also using it as a coping mechanism, because when you move outside that road of Serena, even if it is a small, border borders have knocked, you see people gathering. Yeah. People don't have what to do. In arcades, something comes out very fast, and you have people who have made fun out of it. I think it is a coping mechanism, and it's like, it is what people are surviving on. Like, I need, you get something, you laugh about it, and that is how you're going to survive, because sometimes things become too much for you, and you're like, are we really going to see change coming soon? Are things about to change? And so for me, I want to look at it as a coping mechanism, as in people don't have what to do, and they're just reduced to that.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask each one of you to make your concluding remarks. Let me begin with you, Mr. Bernard Chankara. What's going to be your concluding remark tonight?
I think those that we citizens of this country have entrusted with the responsibility of running this country, owe us a deep, deep level of accountability. It is important that those that we have entrusted behave, organize their behavior, and be responsive enough to provide us, the citizens, as the local people, with the level of accountability that we deserve. But also, the other thing that I cannot live without saying is that the citizens must pay attention to how government is run. Let's take interest, and I know young people are out there who really have smartphones and all these informations. Let's take interest, let's read the information, and let's engage and talk about these issues. It is within our rights as citizens of this country to hold our leaders accountable.
Thank you, Bernard. And Angela, what's going to be your concluding remark tonight?
Yeah, I think Uganda is a very rich country, and we see where the money that can run this country is able to come from. We are going, if we do not raise enough domestic resources, we are going to keep into the spiral of borrowing, and people are going to also lose interest in paying taxes because they don't see what the taxes they are paying they are doing. If I have to pay for my health care, I have to pay for education, I have to travel on bad roads, what is going to be my motivation to even pay taxes in this country? And as long as that is the status quo, we cannot generate enough domestic revenue, it is going to only get worse for this country. Human capital development is key. And we need to, walk the talk around investing in social sectors like education, healthcare, social protection, if we are going to reduce the inequality in this country. If we do not do that, I think what is happening in Kenya will be knocking on our doors very soon, because people feel they are left on their own, and it's going to reach a moment, where they cannot take it anymore. And when you push people to the wall, they are going to get angry, and there are going to be consequences for that. So our leaders, as they lead their extravagant lifestyles funded by our taxpayers' money, they should have that at the back of their minds, that at some point they are going to pay, and the price they are going to pay might really be a hard one. So we need to be serious, but also our MPs, they have to know that we have lost trust in them. Right now, they have no more authority to do anything on our behalf, because what they are serving are their own interests. And we are going to make the next election very serious, and we are going to be asking them hard questions. They are not going to come and preach to us and talk to us in tongues. They have to answer questions around service delivery and how they have done their roles in Parliament. One around appropriation and whether it's been in the interest of the citizens.
Angela Kasule Nabwawe, Executive Director, Initiative for Social and Economic Rights, I want to thank you so much. Bernard Chankara, Public Policy and Governance Expert, I want to thank you. You've been very phenomenal tonight, and I hope Ugandans have picked a thing or two. I believe we are a good country and we have good people. We have had a tumultuous past, we have had a checkered history, but Uganda will always pull through, and we are resilient people. And I think as a country we shall get there. It may not be in a month, in a year, or in 2 years, but let us keep a positive spirit that Uganda, we shall get there. Good night and God bless Uganda.